member of the gallery and a member of the board and a blacksmith artist, right?
Yes, I hope.
Well, somehow I have this picture of a blacksmith as wielding a hammer on an anvil with a piece of metal that's very hot. What are all the big machines?
Well, if you are a blacksmith and the machinery and things that you get to do that work with is going to be worn out and useless in most cases.
Yeah.
Everything from the anvils to the power hammers, vices, anything else. So you have to rebuild all of that stuff.
Okay.
So all the other equipment, the machine shop equipment, is a necessary evil in order to be a blacksmith.
Oh, I
Now,
see.
at least that's the story I tell my wife.
Uh-huh.
Because that allows me to have it.
I see.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a method in the madness, I guess.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us what you use some of these things for, like this critter behind you?
Well, both of these are blacksmith power hammers. They're used to texture, forge, and in some cases just plain alter the metal in general. And you can use dies under them that allow you to produce specific shapes.
Oh.
And in effect, they take the place of the hand hammer.
I see.
Just so you can see, and then you put it under the power hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And it hits this. Of course, it's hot.
Yeah.
It hits this, bends it down, and also flattens the top portion. So when you bring it out, you get this.
Yeah.
And that, it's in here like this. When you hit it the first few licks, it comes out. You put it on the here and flatten this out. Change it from round to flat. And then you can begin to draw this piece down.
Now, what do you mean by draw this piece down?
Okay, you're altering, in this case, you would alter from a round of this size.
To
You would alter
basically
it,
a rectangle.
you draw it down, and as you move metal, as you collapse the metal, it has a tendency to spread in two directions, this way and grow in length. So that's what's called drawing.
I see.
And in this case, you're collapsing it in width and trying to maintain the same
Oh,
thickness. So you have to work here and work here at the same time.
you're just dealing with a lot of ignorance here, so
No,
I may ask some dumb questions.
no, that's a good question. So that's what that tool does. And that enhances the use of these power hammers. This is all of this work was done under the power hammer.
Yes.
Now the copper roses are formed, there are 50 leaves on it. They're formed in 10 5-leaf circles. And then they're hand formed. You can work copper by hand if it's annealed, and you can anneal it by heating it and submerging it in water, and then it'll work very easily by hand. And this is all done by thumbs, fingers, and the texturing on these roses, on the leaves, is done on the back side before you begin to form them. Now, you can form most of that, of a leaf, of the circle, without having to reheat. But if you work it too hard, it will work hard, and then it has to be re-annealed. And you start that process all over
So
again.
then you heat it again and quench it in water.
You do. And the color is applied to it by heating it with a torch and quenching it when you have the color you want on the copper. And that locks it Oh,
So you would do all of this when the leaves are separate?
Right.
Before you assemble them?
yeah.
Okay.
It can be done the other way,
Yeah.
but you have a much cleaner effect with the leaves
Mm-hmm.
if you do them individually, clean them up, and then assemble them.
Yeah.
And there's a black film that can be on the copper if it's either too cold or too hot when you quench it. And it's difficult to heat that many leaves and get them evenly heated and go into the water and cool them at the same time. So it's a little difficult to do that.
Yeah.
The separate work makes it much easier.
I would think so. Well, the end result is absolutely beautiful. And
Thank
I was, I guess this is very naive, but I was so surprised when I picked it up at how heavy it is because
Yeah.
they look so light. They look like a rose, and roses are light.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the whole thing is pretty solid.
But forging is endless. It's only the blacksmith skill that's a limitation.
Uh-huh.
And of course, in the years gone by, most of the tools and the work that was done on an industrial standpoint were done by blacksmiths, industrial blacksmiths. And they made everything from parts for rail cars to parts for assembly lines, for wheels for unusual equipment, just on, and that's big, heavy, hard work. For instance, these anvils
Yeah, this
are
is
forged
huge.
anvils. They were forged under huge hammers like these,
Uh-huh.
and all of this is worked hot by 3 or 4 or 5 men, depending on how big the anvil was. And then the bases were made, if I might, the bases were made here. These bases were made separate from this, from the upper part, and then all of it was heated to the same high heat, about 2,300 degrees, and forge welded together.
Forge welded.
And that's what you call it when you take metal and heat it up to that degree where it's right at the point of melting,
Uh-huh.
and then you hit it with hard blows. It causes it to weld itself to each other
Oh, I see.
without using a welding rod or an electric current to do it.
Which they didn't have much
Didn't
in
have
the
it.
early days.
I'm going to explain the technique behind making this crucifix. This, of course, is a crucifix made out of steel. And it's kind of unique in that it has this hole through it.
Yes.
And first glance you'd say, well, you cut it and welded it or something, but you don't. This crucifix started as a piece of steel like this.
Oh,
And it is cut.
yeah, I see it's
It's cut here, and then it's cut here on the opposite side.
Uh-huh.
And you put it in the forge and heat it up. And then you fold this over, each one over in this direction.
Oh, I see.
And then you do the same thing on this one.
Uh-huh.
And you keep folding, and this diamond appears where those cuts pass one another.
Uh-huh.
So that's the way this is done. And then this is forged just as a,
So you have to know how
ornamentation.
far to make each cut before you start
right.
with
you
the
have
heating.
You have to lay it out. Most things in blacksmith work are laid out, drawn out, or in some way the parameters established before you start work. Otherwise, it either won't fit or just is not successful.
There are an awful lot of things that need a plan before
Yeah,
you
you
start.
need a plan, that's right. So that's a unique way of making
Yeah,
this
I would
crucifix.
never have guessed that that was the way it was done.
Then these tops and all are just forged for a little additional ornamentation. This is put in with chisels while it's hot. So one thing about blacksmithing, everything you do is hot.
Yeah.
And I tell somebody, that ask the question sometimes, what do you charge for stuff? It depends on how many times I get burned in the process
Ooh.
of making it as to how much I charge for it.